A lonely rancher found a native widow sleeping in his barn. He whispered, "From now on, you're home." The morning spread itself over the plains in muted gold, a light that did not rush, but crept tenderly across the earth, touching fence posts, waking grass with dew, slipping over the roof beams of a wide and solitary ranch. Wind stirred the hayfields as though some invisible hand smoothed the land's tired brow. It was the kind of morning that carried both peace and ache, because beauty only sharpened the edges of loneliness when no one stood beside you to share it. He rode home from a distant count of cattle, reins loose in his hands, his bay horse moving steady beneath him. He was a man of 32 years, strong in the shoulders, sun-darkened from labor, dressed plain but neat, boots weathered yet cared for. Handsome in the way the land makes men handsome, features carved clean by wind and sun, voice low as if trained to speak only when words were needed. His wealth stretched in fences, horses, cattle, acres of soil that gave him everything except what he longed for most. No voice in the house. No footsteps across the porch at evening. He lived surrounded by abundance, yet felt hollow inside, like a well with water no one came to draw. The rancher dismounted in the yard and led his horse to the barn. The sky had begun to soften toward dusk, lanterns needing to be lit soon. He pushed the barn doors wide, and the smell of hay, horse sweat, and wood greeted him as it always did. But that night there was something more. A quiet sound, breath not belonging to an animal. He lifted the lantern, its glow scattering across the wooden beams and piles of straw. There, in the far corner upon a bed of hay, lay a woman asleep. Her frame was small but not fragile, wrapped in a traditional dress of earth colors, beadwork glimmering faintly even in the dim light. The dress bore the scars of travel, dust, and a few rents in the cloth, but still clung to its dignity. Long black hair spilled around her face, and her face itself, softened by sleep, carried a tired kind of beauty, the beauty of endurance. She was young, perhaps no more than 24, but grief had already brushed shadows into her expression. The rancher stood still, lantern trembling just slightly in his hand. A stranger in his barn, a trespasser by law, yet he could not bring himself to wake her with harshness. There was something sacred in the way she slept, as though exhaustion had finally released its hold after too many nights of running. He stepped closer, slow as if approaching a wild horse, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. Words slipped from him before he could think, whispered into the hay-scented air, words not meant to wake her, but to steady his own heart. "From now on, you're home." She did not stir. The barn remained quiet except for the soft shift of horses and the faint sigh of the wind through cracks in the wall. He left her there, set the lantern down, and backed away as though he had stumbled into some private prayer. Morning came again, and with it the sound of cautious movement inside the barn. The woman was awake now. Her dark eyes were sharp with fear, darting from the door to the windows, as though measuring how far she might flee if cornered. When the rancher entered, she straightened at once, her body taut, her small hands clenched as though even without weapons she would not surrender easily. He lifted a hand in peace. No words at first, only silence shared until silence softened. Then his voice calm, low, steady. "You're safe." She did not believe him, not yet. Her eyes searched his, weighed him against every man she had known who spoke kindness, but carried cruelty behind it. He asked nothing of her. He did not press her name from her lips, nor question how she came to lie in his barn. He only placed a small loaf of bread on the hay between them, and stepped back. Hunger, stronger than fear, persuaded her. She ate slowly, as though ashamed to take food she did not earn. The hours of the day passed with little said. He tended horses, mended a fence post, fetched water, all within sight of her, so she might see he did not seek to corner her. When she moved toward the door once, he did not block her path, though his chest tightened. She paused at the threshold, the land outside stretching vast, merciless, empty. Something in that emptiness turned her back into the barn. At evening, by the fire, she spoke her first words. Her voice was soft, uncertain in the English tongue, but clear in meaning. "I can leave, if you want." He shook his head, eyes on the flames. "Not tonight." And so she stayed. Over the days that followed, her story came slowly, piece by piece, like beads slipping from a broken string. Her husband had been taken from her in a skirmish with settlers, a man she had chosen against the wishes of her people. She had borne their judgment, the scorn of family who believed she had betrayed them. Widowhood left her not only alone but unclaimed by either world, too native for one, too tied to tradition for the other. She carried nothing with her but her dress, always her dress, the last tether to a life she could no longer return to but could not let go. The rancher listened without interruption. He did not tell her what she should have done, nor question the roads she had taken. He only listened, and in his listening, she felt something unfamiliar, space to breathe, without judgment. Life at the ranch began to shape itself around her presence. She swept the floors of the barn without being asked, gathered eggs from the hens, brought water in buckets though the weight strained her arms. He allowed her, not because he required her work, but because he understood her need to give something back, to prove she was not merely a burden. Sometimes he would ride out into the fields with her walking at his side. He taught her how to guide the young colt, a creature as wary and untrusting as she was. She laughed, quiet, surprised, when the colt finally obeyed her hand. That laugh was the first true glimpse of light he had seen from her, and it stirred in him something dangerous, something tender. She began to notice things about him, too. The way he spoke little, yet treated his animals with patience, the way his hand lingered on the wood of a fence as though he felt its life, the way he carried loneliness not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. In his presence, she was no longer invisible. There were others who noticed her now. The old cook who had worked the ranch for years muttered about another mouth to feed, but his tone softened when she thanked him in her careful English. A neighbor boy, barely 12, brought her a small feather one afternoon, shyly offering it as though it were treasure. She accepted with a smile that made the boy's ears burn red. Still, fear never left her completely. At night, she sometimes woke with a start, eyes wide, listening for pursuers that never came. One evening, as they sat by the fire, her voice trembled with confession. "I thought I was invisible." He looked at her, the firelight shaping his face in shadows and glow. Not here. Something inside her loosened. She lowered her head, hair falling across her cheek, and for the first time since she arrived, she did not curl up on the barn floor, but accepted the blanket he had left by the hearth. She fell asleep there, near enough that he could hear her breathing, far enough that nothing was presumed. The days stretched into weeks, the bond between them weaving not through grand declarations, but through the steady rhythm of shared tasks, glances exchanged, silence held without discomfort. She began to hum sometimes while working, low tunes of her people, sounds that carried both sorrow and strength. He listened, never interrupting, and though he did not understand the words, he understood the heart behind them. One dusk, after teaching her to mend fence, he stood back and watched her hands, raw and reddened, determined as they bound wood with twine. A part of him longed to take her hands into his, to protect them from harm, but he kept still. What bound them together was not need, not desperation, but choice, and he would not risk breaking it by reaching too soon. The night air grew cooler. Stars dusted the sky in silver. She sat by the fire, staring at the flames as though reading them for signs. Her voice, softer than smoke, drifted toward him. "You do not ask me to go." His reply came after a pause, words as careful as his breath. "Because I want you to stay." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, he did not see only grief in her eyes. He saw possibility. Not yet love, not yet surrender, but the faintest shimmer of trust. That was enough. The wind sighed against the cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, the promise of storms yet far away. Inside, two souls sat in silence, not bound by vows nor circumstance, but by the fragile beginnings of something that might, in time, become a home. And though no one spoke it aloud, both felt it rising, slow as dawn. The story was only beginning. The sun leaned low, spilling fire across the horizon, when the first whisper of trouble found its way to the ranch. A rider passing through, dusty from the road, stopped long enough to trade news for water. His words were not careless. He spoke of men, kin of the widow's dead husband, wandering near, asking questions with the kind of sharpness that meant they were not looking to reunite her with kindness. Their talk carried bitterness, voices laden with old debts and grudges. She was spoken of not as a woman, but as a burden they meant to reclaim, whether she willed it or not. The rancher stood listening in the yard, face unreadable, though the line of his jaw hardened. The widow, standing just within earshot, felt the words cut deeper than a blade. Shadows from her past had found her trail. That night, by the fire, her hands twisted the fringe of her dress until it frayed. Her voice was unsteady but resolved. "I cannot stay. They will come. He did not answer at once. His gaze lingered on the flames as if seeking counsel from the quiet burn. When he finally spoke, it was not with command but with something heavier, stripped of pride. I had a house once full of voices. They are gone. I have all this land, and it echoes with silence. You brought sound back to these walls. If you leave, the silence will swallow it again. He lifted his eyes to hers, voice nearly breaking. From now on, you're home. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken the word home to her without conditions. Still, fear clung to her chest. She knew men of blood ties could be crueler than strangers. Yet something in his tone, the way he did not beg nor demand but simply laid his truth bare, struck deeper than her fear. Days passed, each carrying the weight of waiting. Work continued, fences to mend, cattle to move, but beneath the surface lay tension, like a storm gathering behind distant hills. The widow carried herself with quiet courage, though her eyes often scanned the horizon, wary of riders. The rancher carried on as he always had, though every evening he checked the rifle propped by the door, not for threat, but for readiness. The men arrived at last, 3 of them on horseback, their silhouettes cutting against the blazing dusk. Dust rose with their approach, and the ranch dogs barked until silenced by a sharp whistle. The widow froze by the barn, her body taut, hands clenching the folds of her dress. The rancher stepped from the porch, his stance calm but unyielding, as though the earth itself braced beneath his boots. The riders dismounted, voices thick with disdain. She belongs to us, one spat, eyes sliding over her as though she were no more than property misplaced. You've no right to keep her. She has family. The rancher's reply was low, steady. She has the right to choose. The words sparked anger. Family does not choose. Family claims. The widow's breath trembled. She wanted to shrink back, to let the earth swallow her, but something inside her rose instead. For years she had been spoken over, spoken for, treated as though her will were smoke. But this man beside her had left space for her voice, and she felt it press against her throat, demanding release. Her words cut through the gathering tension. I choose. The riders turned toward her, startled by the firmness in her tone. Her shoulders squared though her body trembled. I choose to stay. Silence followed, the kind that tightens every muscle before violence breaks. One man's hand drifted toward his pistol, and the rancher's hand moved as well, resting lightly on his holster. Not in haste, not in threat, but with the calm weight of a man who would not falter. The air throbbed with possibility, blood, gunfire, loss. But did not come. The rancher's silence was stronger than shouting, his stance firmer than bluster. Behind him, the cook stepped out of the kitchen doorway with a shotgun cradled in old arms, and the neighbor boy, wide-eyed but defiant, appeared with a slingshot clenched in his small hand. Others from the ranch, drawn by the noise, gathered in quiet solidarity. The widow realized then that she was not alone. The ranch, once foreign soil, had shifted beneath her feet into belonging. The riders saw it too. Their sneers faltered. No matter their claim by blood, they had no claim by will, and no claim strong enough to break the wall of silent unity standing against them. After a moment thick with unshed violence, the leader spat into the dirt. She'll regret it, he hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. They mounted their horses and rode back into the bleeding sunset, swallowed by distance. When the dust settled, the widow's knees weakened, but the rancher's hands steadied her without grasping, only offering strength. She leaned, just for a breath, then straightened again. Her voice whispered, more to herself than him. I am not invisible. That night, they sat by the hearth. The house felt different, no longer a hollow shell, but a place alive with quiet courage. The widow shed the travel-stained shawl she had always worn over her dress, setting it aside as though laying down the last remnants of flight. The gesture was small, yet the rancher felt it as a vow. He spoke softly, the way one speaks to firelight, so it will not flicker out. This land is yours as much as mine. She did not answer with words, but with the slow meeting of her hand against his. Rough, calloused, steady. Their fingers interlaced, not in passion's haste, but in the stillness of promise. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, carrying with it the memory of threats that had passed and the promise of mornings yet to come. Inside, 2 souls, once strangers, found themselves no longer bound by loss, but rooted in the soil of choice. The night stretched long, but neither feared its silence. It was no longer empty. It was theirs. And though the world beyond their fence lines still carried harshness, the story had shifted, drawn now toward the tender truth every soul longs for, that sometimes home is not a place found, but a place made, one quiet moment at a time.
If this tale touched your heart, ride along with us. Subscribe and never miss the next story under the western stars.